Holy shike, let's talk about pigs. Here's your host of the Pork Podcast, Jennifer Shike.
There's just something about the story behind the story. And as a storyteller, I'm always searching for ways to give readers just a little bit more. And that's what the Pork Podcast is all about, bringing you stories of the people and the progress of the pork industry. I'm Jennifer Shike. Let's go find just a little bit more. Well, what a stretch that we have had in the U.S. pork industry lately. I am so excited to kick off the new year with Christine McCracken with Rabobank. Welcome to the Pork Podcast today.
Great to be with you, Jen.
Well, when I first met you years ago, you were talking about the impact of African swine fever in China. And I remember just being on the edge of my seat thinking, wow, this woman is a dynamo. And that's saying a lot for someone like me who doesn't really love economics that much. If I'm just being honest, it was probably my most challenging class back in college. And I'm just thankful that my husband also took that class so he could kind of help give me a few tips as we went through, because it's a lot. And I feel like you always do such a great job of being able to tie in all of the things that are taking place in the pork market at the same time as having a really deep understanding of what's happening around the entire world. So how do you do that? How did you get into this career path? What led you to the pork industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't a straight path. I would say that I've always been involved, obviously, in 4-H and FFA and showing hogs and cattle and sheep. But my experience with pigs in the early days was pretty limited. I did judge cattle in college, and obviously that gave me access to a lot of great people and some great experiences. But generally, my interest in the industry has really always been in the office. So I think I study economics, obviously, through the years, and I was really interested, I think, in all aspects of agriculture, but really gravitated toward the livestock industry because it mattered, right? It had an immediate impact. There were some really great people. I think that's what really drew me to the pork industry specifically. And I've been fortunate enough to work with so many of these people over the years that I could learn from, and they've been such a huge help. And then, the other aspect of looking at the industry was really the international nature of the meat industry. I mean, the reality is that so much of what we do is impacted by global markets. I had a real interest in trade policy and looking at how things were moving in the world market. I spent some time in Europe and other places working on farms, and I think combining that love of agriculture and obviously the livestock sector as well as global markets has really been a good combination for working in my current role and historically as an analyst. So some good stuff, but not a straight route in any case.
Well, it's usually not a straight path, is it? But, I was just thinking, you've really had so many different life experiences that have all fed into what you do today. And so why don't you tell us, what is it? What is your role at Rabobank? Tell us a little bit about what you do in a typical day.
Oh, well, every day is different. I think that's the good news. And part of why I love working at Rabo. I think if you look at my role currently, I am the head of pork and poultry research for North America. And that obviously involves not only working with our clients to talk to them about what's happening in the world markets, but really evaluating what factors might impact their business going forward. So it's a bit of looking back, but also looking forward, which is a nice combination. And I do that for pork and poultry with our Mexican and our Canadian clients, as well as here in the US and in all parts of the chain. So not only working with producers, obviously, which is obviously has been such a big part of where my research has been focused, but also working with our packers and our further processing sector to really kind of think about what things might impact their their prospects going forward. What might they need to shift their businesses to incorporate? And then thinking through animal health and equipment companies, working with the food service sector in some cases and talking to them about what might be coming down the pike. So it's really kind of all aspects, and it's never the same. So, when ASF was hot, obviously a lot of discussions there. Prop 12 has been a big part of my work. More recently, I've been working on gene editing and what that might look like. So there's always something new, which I love, but it also is a little frustrating at times trying to do it all. And that's obviously a big challenge when you think about your day to day.
Yeah, I love that reminder too, that there are so many things that are interconnected, and we're not just raising pigs out here. We're doing so much more than that, and there's so many factors that come into play. And so, let's start by looking back at 2024. How would you summarize what's been going on in the marketplace and the impact that it's had on pork producers?
Well, I think the good news is that it's a slightly better outlook. We had obviously a rough start to the year, but some things have kind of gone our way. We've got some lower feed costs that are obviously putting us in a slightly better position as we go into next year. I think guys are pretty cautious still. If you look at margins today, they're obviously a lot better, and the outlook for 2025 is better. But coming through the year, what the real difference maker has been exports. U.S. consumption has been good, but really the export movement has been exceptional, and that's a combination of things that have been driving that. But it really is the difference maker for 2024, and I think it'll continue into the year ahead. So, there's a lot to consider when we have big debates around where are all the pigs and how good is productivity going to be next year. But taking a step back and really what got us there here, it's really been lower feed costs, which has been a part of that, but also that just really exceptional export demand.
Mhm. Yeah, thank goodness for that. I just was listening to some talks in the past month, about exports and the impact that they've had, and it continues to, I think, surprise a lot of people of how well the exports did, and continue to kind of keep jumping. What do you think exports look like in the year ahead?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns at this point, given some of the debate around tariffs and what that might look like. Obviously, picking a fight with Canada and Mexico might create some challenges for exports into those markets, which make up almost half of what we're shipping abroad. So that's a big deal. And when I think about vulnerabilities, obviously that's at the top of the list. But you think about some of the competition. Obviously, European pork production has been down, and it's not going to come back anytime soon. So there is still a demand for U.S. pork into global markets, and I think that's the exciting news. I wouldn't look for China to come back as a big market for us, and especially given some of the trade tensions there. But there's some other markets in Asia, obviously. Into Southeast Asia. Japan is another unknown. South Korea, given some of the political disruption we've seen there in the last couple of weeks, is a big one. So there, I would say that I'm fairly hesitant on projecting a big year in 25, and it's something that we all need to think about when we kind of consider our outlook for the coming year. Where else could we be sending that product? I think what's really fascinating, because I also cover poultry, is to look at what's happening in the U.S. chicken market as a comparison, because what's happening there is that we're sending a lot of the product that used to be shipped into international markets, and we're putting it here in the U.S. So we've been able to develop the markets for dark meat, that historically had been going into Asia or parts of Latin America, and really keeping it here in our U.S. market. So thinking about how we can develop maybe some of that stronger domestic demand, and the pork industry is doing a lot of work to really think about how we can make that happen. So it's some opportunities. I think there's still good demand for pork. People love U.S. pork, but it's really about some of these near-term maybe trade challenges that might force the industry to think about what else we could be doing.
Mhm. Yeah. So besides trade, which I do realize is going to be one of the biggest obstacles, looking ahead at 2025, what do you think will be some of the other obstacles that will be surrounding profitability for pork producers this year? And what kind of a profitability do you think is possible for them?
Well, it's a moving target. I think the good news is that a lot of the trends that drove better profitability here toward the end of this year are going to continue into early 2025, right? We're going to have, ongoing low prices, especially on meal. For pig producers, obviously, supplies aren't going to get out of control in the short run, so that's some good news. So we're controlling the things we as producers can do. I think that the big unknowns at this point are obviously around demand on the global stage. Obviously, that's a big one. But I'm also thinking about what could we do to remove or reduce risk. So we think about obviously maintaining our current biosecurity standards and really focusing on keeping our pigs healthy. That's something every producer is focused on all the time. But a good reminder that we have to keep these pigs healthy to make sure that we can stay profitable and avoiding kind of that disruption. The other big challenge the industry, especially at the packer level, might face next year is on labor costs and obviously potential disruption around some of the movement toward in the new administration around tightening some of the immigration standards. Not only could that disrupt things at the plant, but you could start to see some constraints around new workers coming into the market, and that could affect some of our on-farm labor availability. So, there's some things that are going to give us a challenge. I think everyone in this industry likes a challenge, otherwise they wouldn't still be in the industry. But at the end of the day, I think it's all in controlling what you can control. Obviously, managing that risk and working with your advisor to make sure that you're taking advantage of some good profit opportunities. I think there's a number of good guys out there to help you with that, and women. But I think there's all kinds of things every year that can affect the industry, and I'm actually quite optimistic though in the early part of 25 at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you speak about some of the challenges, there's been a lot of lessons I think that we've learned. I mean, to your point, pork producers are always learning, always kind of challenging themselves to do better. And I think that's one of the things that I found that I love so much about this industry. What do you think are some of the biggest lessons that have been learned lately? And maybe how can that spur us on in a new year?
I think about, back to when we were having these conversations even a year ago. I think that the lesson that you can learn, and we learn it repeatedly, is that things do tend to get better, even when things look really bleak. But things can change quickly as well. So I think, making sure that you, again, are managing, you're taking advantage of some opportunities to stay profitable. Obviously focusing on reducing your costs on a regular basis and really controlling, again, what you can to keep your business in good shape is critical. But I do think that it raises obviously some real questions about how can I do things better? When I think about reducing costs, what technologies might I look at? There's obviously no shortage of potential tools the industry can look at. And I do think that, being a constant learner, I do that in my business. Obviously, I'm constantly learning about, new technologies or new markets. And it has to be the same, I think, for the production industry. Obviously, there's a lot of options for people to take advantage of new technologies that might reduce costs. And it's really about working through what those options, how that might work on your operation. When I think about Proposition 12 and how the industry's really stepped up and went through a fairly challenging integration of some production changes on farm, I think, about some real strides the industry took to implement new technologies in a fairly short window. I think it's a great example of how adaptable the industry is and how quickly they can get their arms around something that seems really challenging up front, but in the end is really just an opportunity uh, to adapt and make maybe some lemonade out of some lemons in some cases.
Mhm. Yeah, I felt that there was a pretty positive vibe about some of the Prop 12 things that people have learned this year. In some articles I've written lately, I just felt like people had a pretty good attitude about this was better than they thought. Working with this group was better than they thought. Just overall a positiveness that I wasn't exactly sure that I would be hearing a year later. And so I think that does speak well to that adaptability and being willing to, make lemonade out of some lemons that get handed to you for sure. And I like that you also brought up our shared judging experience and showing livestock. I mean, I don't know if there's any two things that might help you ask questions a little bit better. I mean, growing up with that background and even just watching my husband now as we work with our 4-H team and work with our kids, it's just this like constant evaluation and trying to figure out how you get better. And if we do this, how will this impact that? And so I guess building on that just a little bit, what are some of the questions that you think producers should be asking themselves as they look at the year ahead? Because the one thing I've heard people say is it's going to be better, but it still could have its share of volatility. So what are some of the things producers can do to ask the right questions as they look ahead?
So, I think you always have to be asking yourself, not just how am I going to operate in the year ahead, but really what can I do to prepare myself for, future markets so that you're able to adapt in the long run without making any, big changes overnight. I think that a lot of operators that we work with obviously are doing this all the time. And I think it's a good reminder to position yourself so that nothing blindsides you, overnight, but also that you're taking advantage of some of the new technologies and new markets that might give you an opportunity to stabilize your margins or even, make more going forward. I think a lot of the work that's being done right now to really understand the consumer and understand what opportunities might be available for pork going forward in terms of creating more value down the chain might require some changes, by producers to make sure that you can get the most value out of the industry that's possible, and that might help stabilize margins going forward. So there's some things that I think long term are exciting, but it's always a continuous learning process. I think if you think about how the industry operates.
For sure. Well, one of my favorite things to do is talk to other people about you. And so I reached out to our mutual friend, Dr. Scott Brown, who's an emeritus now, associate extension professor in Ag Econ at the University of Missouri. And I thought he said something I couldn't agree more with. He said, Christine McCracken has played a crucial role in providing the pork industry with sound economic analysis of pork markets. That extends to a view of the economics of the pork industry worldwide. Her timely analysis of pork markets has provided industry participants with information that they have been able to use to make better decisions regarding their operations. And I think that last part is what really stood out to me, is to make better decisions, because at the core of what you do, I know that you have a heart for helping pork producers make better decisions so they can be more profitable and ultimately be sustainable and stay in our business. And so, how do you think your desire to help people, in this case, to help pork producers, drives what you do every day?
Well, my love of the industry is why I wake up in the morning. it's not, y- y- I'm always trying to make the industry or inform the industry, or at least provide information so that they're able to kind of take that and hopefully use it in a way that makes the whole industry better. And I think a difference of ideas in the industry is important. So, we have a lot of great economists, Scott being one, and obviously there's a number of really great people that I've worked with over the years. And I think all of those opinions help build a more complete picture. So, Rabobank obviously has offices around the world. I rely heavily on my counterparts in other offices to inform me so that I can better understand the global markets. And I think in that same way, I'm helping the industry, not just in pork, but in poultry and in all markets that I work with, to be able to understand the full picture. So, it warms my heart when I can make a difference and help people. But it's also, I think, personally rewarding to work with so many great people in an industry that's meant a lot to me over the years, and I think continues to mean a lot to me in a lot of ways.
I was thinking about how you've shared with me before, you have a lot of conversations with producers. I mean, you're talking to people a lot. And I think that's one of the similarities, though maybe we have very different jobs. There's a lot of similarities in what we do, and that it really is driven by the people that we get to work for and those conversations that we get to have. And I know you've told me how important it is to keep encouraging producers because it has been a tough season for people. And so I don't know how to talk about this, but I guess I just wanted to open the door, for any encouragement that you might have, because I know you've mentioned that to keep writing about mental health, to keep encouraging people, to be honest about the struggles and the challenges that they feel, because I think it's so easy to bottle things up. I know it's easy for me too.
Yeah.
I'm a talker, but I can still bottle up with the best. How do we come around and help each other better in our industry? Or I guess any thoughts that you might have on that?
Well, it's mental health, and I think even personal struggles are always such a tough topic to speak to in any open format. I think, like I mentioned, I get to meet a lot of great people in the industry, and checking in with the people that on a regular basis, not just about business, but asking them how they're doing personally is so important. And not being afraid maybe to talk about it. I think, you've done so much good work about really opening the door for people and being open and establishing a dialogue on some of these topics. But I think as an industry, providing some resources for producers and the industry more broadly so that it's not so taboo, I think is a first step. It's always going to be a bit tough, but maybe more on a one-on-one basis. We all work with a lot of people one-on-one and checking in, especially when they're struggling, and it may not be on a business level. It may just be a personal challenge that they're facing. Making sure that if something seems off, that you're also offering resources. So, I do think that you've done the industry such a service in providing some of those resources and options for people. But I think, we as an industry can always do better in making sure that everyone's in a better place and knows that, we're there and we have their back.
Yeah. It's not just saying, how are you doing? It's listening to how they're doing and being able to really, really absorb what that is and create a space where they can. And I think you do that so well. I mean, it's evident when we're at trade shows or events, you have like a flock of people. I drive them away because they're scared they're going to be on the record, and you draw them in because they want to glean from you. So I laugh at that, but that's fine. It's fine. But any insights? I know you've been hitting the road a lot lately. Anything standing out to you from some of your travels? What are some of the big topics you're hearing about or expect we'll hear about in the year ahead?
I mean, it's been a really interesting couple of months. This fall, I was lucky enough to go to the CIAL and the International Meat Secretariat meetings in Paris and talk to a lot of our meat colleagues from around the world. And I think the real beauty of coming together as a global industry is that you can really take the temperature of what's happening. And other, you can read a lot, but unless you talk to people one-on-one, it's sometimes hard to get a real feel for what's happening in other parts of the world. And I think, the reality is that as tough and uncertain as things are here, it's very similar, obviously, in other markets. So I think we're all facing the same thing, and I think there's a lot to be learned from our global colleagues as well. When you think about other markets and maybe where things have been a challenge with regulation and some of the obvious challenges in operating in Europe, it's been a good wake-up call, I think, for me in terms of what might be coming down the road for our U.S. producers, and maybe some things that we can do differently from not only a regulatory perspective, but also as they've been battling with ASF, and some really well-managed operations and some things that, a good reminder that biosecurity is key, but there's also a lot of things that we can do to make sure that if affected, we can reduce the impact of something like that. That's been really eye-opening. I think the growth in Brazil is just phenomenal. And I think it's really an interesting market to stay in front of and understand what the competition is going to look like going forward, and some reasons that they're successful. Why are they able to grow so fast? Obviously, we're both helped by low feed costs and some really good operations, but structurally, is it that they're starting with a blank slate, or is it that they have access to export markets? So I think it's really interesting, and for me personally, always very rewarding to go to an international meeting to get some insights on that, but also some growth opportunities. We talked to some guys from Africa that are expanding opportunities there for meat, and some of the challenges from an infrastructure standpoint that those are challenges that are going to take years to work through. And I think that providing that longer term outlook and understanding where we could grow access in the long run is a good one. Also, I've been to some poultry meetings lately. We had some leadership meetings in New York here on the last couple of weeks, meeting with some CEOs. And I would tell you that a lot of people are just super concerned about what the next year brings in terms of changes in trade policy, and to where some of the cuts in the federal budget and how that might impact the industry going forward. So some bigger picture, kind of longer term takeaways from some of those meetings. But as I think about it, my job is probably never been more important, because I'm out there trying to get a feel for that and bring that information back to the industry. So some really good stuff in terms of information. It's just about translating that to something that's usable for the pork producers and packers that I work with.
For sure. Well, we appreciate that you do that. And, one of the things too that we like to talk about is, amidst all of our crazy traveling and busy jobs, is probably our favorite thing to talk about, our children. And I love that you're just slightly ahead of me, so I can kind of be paying attention and learning from what you learn along the way. So I appreciate that. Thank you for paving the way. But talk to me about, you've got one in college and you've got one getting ready to graduate. So that's a lot. How are they doing? And anything you've learned about having a kid in college? Because I'm only a little, not quite a semester in. And so I'm kind of anxious to be like, how did all this go? But tell me, what can I learn from you?
Wow. Well, that's an easy one there. Yeah. it's I think every kid's experience and every parent's experience with college is a little different. I've got two children, as you know, and my son's experience at college has been fantastic. The one thing I think that surprised me is competitive as things were in getting into college. It doesn't stop. It's still competitive. It's competitive, in his case, to get into a club. They have to rush clubs, which I think is super interesting, and it kind of speaks to the craziness of college. But also, the internships, which have become so competitive and start so early for a lot of these kids. So I think that's been a bit of a shift in my thinking. I kind of thought that once they got into college, it'd be a little easier. But it's not. Everything is a competition. I think, and from our standpoint, maybe we're pretty well prepared for that. But I think this generation it's an interesting one. Communication. A lot of these kids obviously went through the pandemic and had some challenging times through that. And I think the two things that stand out in my mind that are a little different than my experience are, one, that these kids might not have the same communication skills. When I had an issue in college, I would go see the professor straight away. In their case, they're a little bit more, they rely a little more heavily on emails, and are a little bit more standoffish, at least in the case of my kids. But I think that finding great professors and great educators is still critical. And I think that hasn't changed. We have some really good, obviously, educators in the swine industry and in agriculture more broadly. But I think that what they're learning and the technologies and how quickly they're changing is changed. Even to think about AI and how that might affect the workforce and the jobs that they apply for is a big one. So I think they're going through college in a really difficult time because it's constantly changing. The kids are changing. It's super hyper competitive. And there's a lot of unknowns. So it's preparing them well for the pork industry because, the reality is that all of those are critical skills, right? Adaptability and being able to navigate all of that. But I do think that, as a mother, it's really highlighted the need to be focused and present in their experience, but also to stand back a little. It's hard to watch them kind of do it on their own, and it's about giving them the skills to be able to do that. So that's tough, as you know, to kind of send them on their way, especially for someone that likes to have so much control over so many things. But I do think that every kid's different, and what they need from you as a parent is going to be different, aside from help maybe with tuition. So
Right. No, I agree. I think that's such a good point about giving them that space to figure out who they are on their own is hard. And then you're like, am I giving them too much space? Am I, do they need more space? I don't want them to think I don't care, because I even was like, how many times should a mother check in? And how many times should you? So I've kind of, I feel like I've done a pretty good job of giving space. I just hope that was the right mom thing to do. And meanwhile, my son is a junior, and so I'm very aware of how fast it goes, having just had my daughter Zoom out of the house. And so I just kind of want to like soak every minute in with him. And the poor guy probably just wants me to give him a little more space too. But I'm like, where are you going? I'll be there. I'm going to watch. So it's fun, but it's hard.
You have to, and I think you learn a lot over time. It's always easier in hindsight. But I do think it also helps you recognize the good times and the time that you do get with them over the holidays and on breaks when they come home, that you enjoy that time too. And you're not just working through the holidays. You actually take the time to enjoy spending time when they're in the house with you. So it's been a good learning experience.
Well, I have loved getting to kind of watch your kids' journey and to be able to to kind of see how you balance it all. You're a great example of being fabulous in what you do and making a really big impact in our industry, but also not losing sight of what matters most with your family. And so I just want to applaud you for that. And again, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate that you've taken time to stop your crazy schedule to give us some of your time so we can learn from you. And again, I want to just thank everybody for joining us today. You can dive into more of the Pork Podcast on Farm Journal's YouTube channel, or you can listen to it anywhere podcasts are found. I'm Jennifer Scheich, finding the story behind the story.